The next part of the talk I want to get onto is the traditional supervision, what I refer to as a bureaucratic approach. Now, a lot of the discussion is going to seem negative, and it's not. But a bureaucratic approach to supervision, a traditional approach to supervision, is really about risk avoidance from the institution's perspective. But it's not necessarily the best way of conducting a supervision. Well, not in all cases and not at all times. So let's have a look at some of this traditional approach to supervision, a bureaucratic approach. Now, I would characterise a bureaucratic or traditional approach to supervision as a waterfall approach. And in particular, it's a particular approach to HDR project management that has the expectation that all parts of each phase must be completed before the next phase is conducted. So we have to identify all the problems first, and then we have to do all the literature next, and then after that we have to develop some theory, and then after we've completed that we do the methods and so on. And this is an approach to supervision that's traditional. We see it in lots of other kinds of project management as well. For example, in the development of software, older forms of software use this kind of waterfall approach, and it's a very popular one. It's not necessarily essential to have all of the elements of a dissertation done before the next logical stage happens. The problem is that this bureaucratic approach is really talking about a dissertation, a final output, but not a thesis. I make a distinction between these two things. A dissertation is the written document and based on original research. The thesis is the underlying argument. Okay, so traditional bureaucratic approach to supervision tends to favour the production of the written document rather than the argument. But this also creates a kind of a mindset in supervisors who are exposed to it. It's one that emphasises rules and regulations. The responsibility is firmly in the student's court. Anything outside of the essential elements of the dissertation is irrelevant. What this approach can't assist supervisors in is getting any better at their craft, because it precludes the possibility of thinking about the process of developing a dissertation. It provides no insights into what supervision is or how to do it. So that's the problem with this approach. The bureaucratic approach to supervision works against non-traditional pathways into HDR programs, particularly students that come from industry into PhD programs. And they can be really good students, but they're not necessarily familiar with all the literature that they need to be. They may not be knowledgeable about theories. What they can tell you a lot about is cases, and they have a wealth of information about that. They also may have an idea about methods, or at least practices, and these themselves may become the subject of the research as well. So in effect, some PhD supervisory teams need to lead a student in the reverse order that would be suggested by a bureaucratic approach to supervision. That is, work from the cases back through the methods up to the theory and the literature, and then the research problems. So a kind of reverse of the usual tactic. An important aspect of this, breaking this bureaucratic approach, is to understand that the read order is not the same as the write order with a dissertation. By that I mean, when you are developing a dissertation, you don't use the waterfall. You tend to work from a particular perspective that enables you to bring the student along in the process. And you don't usually expect students, or it's not necessarily always a good way, of starting them right at the beginning with the problems and then attack the literature and so on. This kind of bureaucratic approach of the waterfall creates a kind of cookie-cutter approach to supervision, and it wastes a considerable amount of time as far as I can see. For example, if you are getting the student to read a lot of literature that in effect won't inform anything that they do in the final thesis, then it doesn't really help you understand your problem. And another consequence of this cookie-cutter approach is a wasted time and effort. So literature that's read by a student that doesn't really help their final PhD is perhaps a little irrelevant. If the student team doesn't know how to work around this waterfall, then they can put functioning or potentially successful HDR candidate at risk. Traditional views of supervision don't work so well when the dissertation wanders off into unexpected territory, which sometimes happen. It's sometimes worthwhile allowing it to happen. Traditional views of supervision, this one-size-fits-all approach, are fundamentally teleological. Traditional pathway students rarely progress downstream in a linear chapter order. And often this bureaucratic approach does set up inexperienced students and candidates for failure.